Good morning, everybody. Hey, welcome. Can you hear me okay in the back row? Can you guys, am I coming through all right? No? Okay. We'll pick it up a little louder. Okay, how's that? Hey, welcome to another scintillating installment of Psych 320, Personality Psychology. Lovely to see your smiling faces yet again today. What happened to the weather out there? We were having summer. It was like 95 freaking degrees, and what is it? It's crazy out there. But you have chosen, you are the few, the proud, actually the many, the proud, who've chosen to brave the elements, and you are right here. So delighted to see your smiling faces, and we will hopefully make it worth your while. A lot of ground to cover today. Before we launch into lecture proper, I want to cover a couple of quick public service announcements. Announcement number one, as always, I will be having office hours right after class today, right in here. If you don't mind hanging around for a little bit, sometimes there's a little bit of a line, as you may have noticed, but I never leave until I talk to everybody. And then tomorrow, on Friday, by the way, if you want to come and talk about something a little bit more private, Friday is a really good time to drop by my office. I'm up in Fraser, 4th floor, Fraser 410. It's on your syllabus. Come by between 2 and 3. Usually, I can't promise, but usually office hours are pretty free, pretty flexible on Fridays. Can't imagine why. I think it maybe has something to do with the fact that Thursday is the new Friday. Thursday, possibly there is some festive activity going on at night. There may be imbibing of adult beverages. There could be some hangover kind of residual leftover effects on Friday. I don't know. I'm just inferring. You guys can help me out with that. I mean, not with that actual experience. I'm too old for that. But you can help me out with just the informational component of that. So that's that. Now, just to help you keep track of current events in this class, today is actually, if you don't count the first time we met, so we've met, this is our fourth time, right? Count last Tuesday, Thursday, this Tuesday, and then today, fourth time we've met. First time doesn't really count in terms of course content too much, because we mostly sort of went over the ground rules of the class, did some introductions, that sort of thing. So this is our third time together. This, I hope, will be the last installment of kind of laying the groundwork for our whirlwind tour of personality psychology for the rest of the semester. So what we're going to do today, I think you'll find it kind of fun, is we're going to finish looking at these various sources of information or data on personality and the sort of the pros and cons of each and some examples of each. Obviously, this material will some of it at least, will show up on your first exam, which is far away. Actually, only about 2.5 weeks. But so it's kind of coming down the pike. You don't have to worry about it too much yet. Although I will say, for those of you who have struggled a little bit in the past with exams that tend to be, as they will be in this class, more multiple choice and matching and true false, where there's a lot of factual content to learn, it really is a good idea. I know you've heard this before. It's kind of like when you ever go see your dental hygienist and they're kind of lecturing you about flossing like 18 times a day or whatever. And you're like, yeah, I'll get to it. Some of you actually do. I know, and that's great. You hear the lecture and you're thinking, yeah, I know I should, but then you never get around to it. I really do want to encourage you. I want you all to do well. I'm pulling for you all. Every semester, I'm always thinking, as I come in and I start the semester with my students, and I always really feel a connection with my students. I'm always pulling for them. I'm always thinking, hey, wouldn't it be great if this were the first semester in my entire career where like every student just hit it out of the park, where every student did well. If you guys all do well, I don't curve. I would give 270 A's if 270 students deserved it. Okay, I'm pulling for you. I'm on your side, but you got to earn it. You got to put in the work. Some of you will need to put in more than others, and that's just the way it is. It's not really fair that way, but that's just the reality. So let me help you. If you've ever seen the iconic movie Jerry Maguire, have you ever seen that movie? Yeah, the movie. You know that classic line where Cuba Gooding Jr. is and who is it? Tom Cruise are having this fight, and he's all like, "Help me, help you, help me, help you." So, man, that didn't go over well at all. That was terrible. But hopefully you get the bottom line, which is I am more than happy to help you get prepared to do really well in the class. Generally speaking, for those of you who have struggled, it's going to mean making some flashcards or something and starting to review in advance. So I just put in my little plug. If you want to talk more about that, come see me. We have our intrepid teaching assistant, Corey Washington, right over here. Corey, why don't you say hey to the folks at home?
Hello.
Thanks, Corey. Hey, what's up with you these days, Corey? We haven't heard from you for a while. I'm putting you totally on the spot, but that just comes with the territory of this class. Tell folks just one interesting thing that you've done in the last week that they might, and you can put them to sleep. It's fine. It doesn't have to be really that interesting.
Nothing that interesting. I mean, research. And that's
yeah, there you go.
Trying to get a few studies off the ground, so I've been in my lab kind of typing away. But that's not interesting at all.
We're riveted. That's awesome. Thank you. That's great. So, by the way, come see Corey as well. Corey loves getting to. I'm putting words in your mouth, but I got a feeling about Corey. He loves getting to know undergrads. He'd be happy to tell you all about how to get into grad school, how awesome grad school is, how much fun, how grad students make the big bucks while they're. Not so much, yeah. But the compensation in terms of life satisfaction and happiness is way more important than any possible financial remuneration, I'm sure. Yeah, Brian, what do you got?
Corey. I've neglected to email Corey with my participation. I'm supposed to do that within 24 hours.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Is there some way to catch up on
unfortunately, the rules are cool, right? But from now on, though, you'll be right on top of it. Yeah, thank you for that reminder. That's very helpful, PSA. If you want to claim your extra credit for participating, of course, please do so within 24 hours of the class in question. And the other little friendly amendment to that is Corey's not your guy for that. Corey does a million things for this class, but tracking extra credit is not one of them. That is our other TA, Araba Kofi. So you want to be sure to get her on that email when you claim your extra credit. Okay, let's. Any other questions about anything class related or meaning of life or anything Jayhawk football? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Only because you'd mentioned the test. Do you give out a study guide or something to help prepare for it? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. There is. In fact, I think you can go on Blackboard right now and see the study guide that students got last year. It won't. I always have to update it a little bit, because I never do it the same way exactly 2 years in a row. But it'll give you at least a vibe for a flavor for the sorts of things that you'd want to be attending to really carefully. But I'll give you a quick heuristic or rule of thumb. Anything that's talked about in class lectures, fair game. Okay? Actual content in terms of facts, concepts, theories, anything talked about, examples, anything talked about in lecture is fair game. If it doesn't happen in lecture, it almost certainly will not be on the exam. So it's very lecture-centric. And that's the main reason why I actually post the videos of the lectures, so that folks can go back and listen to them. I'm told that it's a lot better experience for some students when you can change. Did you know you can change the playback speed? It's pretty awesome. I hate listening to myself on 2x because it sounds like I've just been inhaling helium or something, but you can 2x Dr. Alardi. And I'm sure sometimes when you're sitting in lecture, you wish you could do that. Or you can 0.5x it if you just really want to slow it down, because sometimes I get excited when and I get kind of fast. So anyway, to your taste, you can do that. All right, let's pick back up where we left off last time. We were talking about self-report by the way, I didn't mention it, but it is vastly overused. There's a disadvantage or con for you, number 3 under cons. By the way, note to self, you do not have to memorize these in any sort of order. These are just the order they came to me when I was putting together advantages and disadvantages. But they are vastly overused. What do I mean by that? How about this? The vast majority of what we know about people's personality comes from their own self-report. Comes from just asking them what they're like. Why is it vastly overused? Well, it is the easiest type of data to obtain. It's super simple just to give somebody a questionnaire and have them fill out information about themselves. It's cheap, it's quick, and dirty. You guys do a lot of that in social, right?
Plenty of it.
Plenty. Too much, really.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do in clinical, we do in personality. I mean, it's vastly overused. I hope that it sort of lodges like a splinter in your mind. Like, wait a minute. Researchers are just kind of, I hate to say this, but a little bit seduced by the easiness of this, by the availability of it, and it almost makes them seem like they're a little lazy. And that's probably a fair accusation. But I just want to make sure you're aware of this, that the majority of what we know about personality comes from these self-report data, for better and for worse. Now, luckily, it turns out that we can get some pretty good information, depending on what we're trying to find out, using self-report. But it comes with some really big limitations or caveats or disclaimers. One of them, as we just started to mention last time, is bias. When you ask somebody to describe themselves, when you ask them about themselves, when you ask them, hey, what are you like? Tell me, imagine this. And by the way, it's easier to think about this if you're asking somebody that's not you. So like imagine you're asking your roommate, or a friend of yours, or somebody you've just gotten to know, hey, how smart are you? How nice are you? How funny, ooh, that's a good one. How funny are you? How good a driver are you? Ask them to describe themselves in all these different domains, and one of the things we find is that the great majority of people, not everyone, and you may be an exception, I promise some of you are exceptions, but most people have a self-serving bias. And what we mean by that, again, is that most people think more highly of themselves than the objective data would warrant. Most people think they're smarter than they are, funnier than they are, better looking. Ooh, how about that one? Did you know that? Most people think they're better looking than they are. I think I left you, did I not give you the factoid on Tuesday that over 90% of college professors think they're above average professors, right? Over 90% of people think they're above average drivers. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. Now, why might this be true? I'm actually curious. There's a saying in programming circles. My guy, Vivek, right up here. Programmer extraordinaire. Am I right? Vivek, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but...
What about programming?
You have a little bit of background in
Yeah,
that.
definitely. CS major.
Yeah. Guy, in fact, might even have a job lined up for... Yeah. Vivek, there's a saying, I don't know if it's still... Back when I was learning how to program many, many moons ago, sometimes we'd say, if there was something about a program that the user didn't like, sometimes we'd say, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's not. Have you guys heard that saying? It's not a bug, it's a feature? Because you sort of, at first, you're like, wait a minute, seems buggy. But then the programmer's like, no, we're trying to do that. Is that true?
Yeah, definitely. A common mindset.
Yeah. All right. So here's my question for you. This quirky human self-serving bias, is it a bug or is it a feature? In other words, are we designed to have self-serving bias, to think better of ourselves than we should? Or is it just a quirky bug of human nature that's just basically a design flaw, as it were? Bug or feature? What do you think, and why? Bug or feature? And I would love it if you would raise a name tag if you have it, so I can call on you by name. Yes, sir, Evan. What do you got? Let me get you on mic here. I'm going to crawl over everybody. Go ahead.
Well, thinking of ourselves as better than we are definitely increases our motivation to reproduce, which...
Wait, what?
Like, if we...
You're getting ready for the weekend, I can tell. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Like, if someone has higher self-esteem and they think they're great, they're more likely to think that they should make more of themselves, which, through evolution, makes it more likely that people are going to have self-favoring bias, I guess.
I like the way you think, Evan. That's a really interesting idea. So, I mean, it's an interesting hypothesis. Maybe, is there a certain level, maybe, of kind of hubris involved in thinking, hey, the world needs more people like me? I mean, maybe a little bit. That's kind of interesting. Rowan, yeah, go ahead. Rowan.
Yeah. So I wasn't thinking of it as much in terms of being a bug or a feature, but maybe like because people may think, oh, I'm a great driver because I'm so defensive. I cut people off. I'm so great. I can get where I'm going. But someone else is thinking like that's not safe driving, so it's not good. Like they have a different definition of these words. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So if I'm, oh, this is weird. Hearing that feedback up here. If I'm following you, it's almost serving bias extends to the way in which we might even interpret a given thing. Like, have you ever noticed that people, if they're good at one thing, then they tend to make that thing really important? It's like, oh man, everybody should, like, this is a really important thing. Like, I'll just give you a silly example, but like, imagine that there are two areas that people could be good at in high school. They could either be really academically talented or athletically talented. And people that are more academically oriented would tend maybe to think that's more important than being athletic. But people that are more athletically oriented, they might be like, well, that's what's really important. And so then if you said, well, hey, are you talented? Then both individuals could say, yes, absolutely. So that's kind of part of the self-serving bias, a very sophisticated point. Who's got anything else? Do you think you got over here? Yeah, go ahead, Brian. And this is like 2 for you today, so we're going to cut you off after this. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was thinking it's. Shoot, I forgot what I was going to say.
I totally put. I'm so sorry. Yeah, go ahead. No, just be right in the moment. I know you have something valuable to share, so go ahead.
I think it's a. I think it's more of a bug. But I think people just don't know themselves very well.
Okay, yeah, and philosophers throughout human history have often weighed in on that point, and allegedly the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece said, you know what it said, the inscription above the oracle? It said, know thyself. Know thyself, the implication being that maybe that's a little bit of an unusual state of affairs. But, okay, just to help you guys out, and thank you for weighing in, to help you guys out with this, is there some advantage to thinking more highly of yourself than you should, or is it a disadvantage, and why? What do you got?
I mean, I think it can be an advantage and a disadvantage, but I do see it as a bug because, kind of to say opposite, I think that we don't know enough about other people because we don't, like, live each other's lives. We, like, experience ourselves the most, and so then, like, we oftentimes see other people's faults and then, like, attribute, like, our faults to, like, the outside world, and like vice versa.
Yeah, that's really good, AJ. In fact, what you've just articulated, I don't know if folks followed it, but this next little term here, the fundamental attribution error, you just articulated that. I don't know if you were. Yeah. So this is going to be a little bit dicey. I'm going to weave that in organically into this conversation, and I'm going to get a couple more. Fundamental attribution error is something that psychologists have discovered. The basic point, the word attribution, don't be thrown by that. It's just a fancy way of saying, how do we explain what causes things? And so if you attribute something to a certain cause, and that's how you explain it, the fundamental attribution error is, for ourselves, think about this. This is not everybody, but the vast majority of people, if you screw up, if something goes badly, if you do badly on an exam or something, the typical explanation is, oh, it's something outside of me. It's that professor, was not fair. Or, I was having an off day. Or, the storm kept me up last night, so I didn't get enough sleep, and that's why I did. You with me? But if you see somebody else do bad on the exam, you're like, oh, they're not a very good student. You see it? In other words, when it's about something negative about ourselves, our tendency is to attribute it, to explain it away as external to us. Circumstances. When it's about us, we take all the circumstances into account. Have you ever heard that term, extenuating circumstances? It's like, oh, I'm a good driver, but extenuating circumstances. That person slammed on their brakes and the road was slick, and it's like I'm a really good driver just because that's my fourth moving violation in the last year. But if it's somebody else, we're like, oh man, that person's a horrible driver. It's like they should be more careful, right? That was good. Okay.
We have one right here.
Go ahead, Corey. And tell us your name, by the way.
Natalie.
Natalie, yeah.
I was going to say about the self-serving bias that, like, if you see yourself a certain way and kind of promote that outward, other people will start to see you that way too and kind of conform to
Okay, wait. This is really good. I want you to really unpack that. If you see yourself, so are you saying if somebody, we'll call them Dr. Alardi, just some random person, seems like they've got a lot of confidence, what's the impact of that? Have you ever, by the way, and I promise I'm going to come back, have you guys ever known somebody that seems way more confident than they should? You know what I mean? Now, I don't mean they're psychotic. I don't mean, like they're just like, how to put this? I don't mean they're psychotic. I don't mean they're out of touch with reality. I just mean, like, have you ever known that person? You're like, God, they've got a lot of swagger. And I don't really get it. Like, they don't seem very special to me. They don't seem particularly good looking or athletic or smart or kind or successful or ambitious. But man, they got a lot of swag. There's something there. I need to check this out. I like this person.
Yeah.
Have you seen? I'm sorry.
No, you're.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, because I feel like if you think like you promote that enough, you're gonna be exhibiting it more, and then will just keep conforming it for other people, so they believe it, and then you continue to have more of it in a way, if that makes any sense. It's like
yes, it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, yeah.
So could it be a feature or not a bug? Could it be, Vivek, if we were going to be programming the human mind, from scratch? Well, let's just say we're going to be programming a robotic, sort of humanoid mind. Might we want this artificial humanoid to have a little bit more confidence and a little bit more, might they be more successful? Might they? Yeah, I think there's some really good evidence. I think, Emily, I saw your card next. Go ahead.
So I think it could be good and bad. For like American culture, for example, like we try to focus more on our strengths and like overplay that and then own that. But then our weaknesses we don't talk about. We don't like really like own up to it. And then when our weaknesses we're like below average, like we can see that, and the self-serving bias is like reversed that way, and that leads to like low self-esteem in those areas, or like depression. And then with our strengths, like it creates blind spots when we talk to like other people who struggle with like our strengths or something, or like overplay themselves or are arrogant. So honestly, I think like both weaknesses and strength need to be more of like you need to view them more as like a good and bad for each of them, rather than like my strength is like above average, like 100%, and then my weakness is like 0%.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A lot of nuance there, right? So it sounds like, just to paraphrase, you think that there are ways in which being more confident than the objective data would warrant can be an advantage, but there are also ways in which it might. You said something about when we're vulnerable with others, that it's a kind of an invitation to greater intimacy, to greater connection. Have you guys ever noticed that? It's really hard to do. But sometimes when you kind of drop your guard a little bit and really get vulnerable, other people feel a lot better able to connect. But it's super risky, right? And the people that do that more often, depending on how they do it and when they do it, might not always end up being an advantage. But certainly we know that within a close relationship, dropping the facade and getting more vulnerable is a real invitation to greater intimacy. So that's a really nice point. What do you got?
Good one back here.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, hey, let's get you on mic. Let's get, wait. Well, no, we need you on mic. Let me tell you, can I stop you for a second? Let me tell you why. Because there are folks that are going to watch this on video and they can't hear unless you're on mic. So if you want to play, you got to be on mic.
To answer your initial question, is it better to say it again? Your initial question, is it better to have both? Or to... Well,
yeah, or how about, is it advantageous? Is there something, are we designed to be more confident than we should be on average?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do before two people answered, and to play off of what she was saying. It's bad sometimes to have overconfidence, and then she went to play on the positive of it. It's okay to have both, and I went initially to say, yeah, I was neutral on the fact, because sometimes it's okay, but like she was saying, when you want to be vulnerable and you have that confidence, you can step out of your comfort zone because you feel you have that overconfidence in yourself to do that or whatever. And so I wanted to play on both. Like it's no which one's better than the other. I think both is at an advantage when you have more or less confidence.
Okay, yeah, thanks. It sounds like a kind of maybe a vote of confidence for this more nuanced position. Let me just say this, and I know a lot. Thank you to all of you who wanted to ask or make a comment about this. in general, what we find is that if you see yourself exactly as you should, in other words, if you think you're just as good looking as you actually are, just as funny as you actually are, just as smart as you actually are, just as talented as you actually are, that on average, you probably will not do quite as well as if you have a bit of self-serving bias. On average, we find that in most areas, people that have at least some self-serving bias do better. Socially, occupationally, they take more chances, they apply for more things than they otherwise would have. You ever seen somebody that's like, have you ever had that friend? Here's maybe one way we can illustrate it. Have you ever had the friend that's the opposite, that sees themselves as worse than they are? That beats themselves up and and you're just like, you're awesome, I love you, you're amazing, you have all these, and they're just like, no, I suck, I'm a loser, and they might not even apply for a position that they really are qualified for. Or maybe, how about this, somebody who, it's a bit of an iffy thing, like, you probably won't get it, but they're just like, hey, you know what, why not? Like, I'm as, probably as capable as anyone, and they're putting themselves out there, even in ways that are going a little bit beyond maybe their talent level. And in general, good things happen for those overconfident people to a point. Now, notice I said to a point, and several of you have given that caveat. You gave that caveat to a point. Have you ever known somebody that's just insufferably narcissistic, where they just think they're God's freaking gift? And it's like psychotic level, like, dude, here's a mirror. You need this. Like, I mean literally and metaphorically sometimes. Like, you are completely out of touch with reality. And people like that often do not do particularly well. Eventually, life will provide lots of corrective feedback for most of them. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that argument kind of reminds me of the movie I Feel Pretty. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's basically like she is that kind of deprivating person.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that. Yeah. Who's the lead? Yeah.
And then she hits her head and she thinks she is got a gift to earth, but it makes her get a promotion in her job, and she gets a man, so it works out for her kind of.
That's a brilliant example. Thank you. Oh, I think I have to watch that. Yeah, that's really good. Go ahead.
Then it reverses, and she goes back to her old self, and she lost all of her friends and everything, and so she's trying to get them back because they just saw her as the pretty girl, and that's what she wanted.
Yeah, that's a great. I think we can kind of all sort of relate to, if not personally, you've known somebody like that. I want to tell you really quickly about the flip side of it, and see if I can organically segue to another point up here, which is, here's an advantage of self-report. And this one is a little bit deep, but I want to make sure you get it. Even our distortions of self-image are important as a feature of our personality. In other words, if you ask somebody, what are you like? And you find out that their self-report is filled with bias. Either they think they're better than they actually objectively are, or they think they're a lot worse. That, in and of itself, is important information. Why? Because people who are moderately self-serving in their bias, they tend to actually have some benefit from that. And it may be part of our design spec. We may be actually designed to be a little self-serving. That's a hypothesis. We don't know for sure. But it's so widespread that a lot of us kind of have the suspicion that maybe it is part of how we're designed. The people that don't have it, that beat themselves up and think they're actually worse, how many of you have known somebody like that? How many of you are pretty close to somebody who thinks they're way worse than they actually are? It tends to interfere with their flourishing, right? In a lot of ways. I'll tell you about a good friend of mine, just because it's such an extreme example of this. I'm not going to give you his name because this is going up on video. And some of you, I'm connected with a few of you on social media. By the way, you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Alardi. I mean, I wouldn't advise it, but I mean, you're welcome to. So I'm not going to tell you this guy's real name because some of you might figure out who it is. I just, I wouldn't want to. But I'm going to tell you about him. I'm going to call him. Is it okay? I'm going to call him give him a fake name. We'll call him Biff. Okay. So my buddy Biff, he is the only person I've ever known that got a perfect score on all 3 sections of the graduate record exam, which is like the grad school version. You know what this is, right, Corey? Did you take the GRE? Yeah. All 3 sections of the sort of grad school version of the ACT. Perfect score. I don't mean 99%. I mean perfect. He didn't miss anything on all 3. This guy's brilliant. When we were in college together, we were roommates, and he was so insanely good looking that anytime we would ever go out, he would get hit on by both women and men. Every time. I mean, it was unbelievable. He's just objectively so, sickening. But in a nice way. I mean, but you know what? One of the reasons I love him so much is he doesn't see it. He actually has a very low self-regard. And he beats himself up a lot. Now, we speculate about where that comes from. It might be relevant that when he was 6 months old, his father abandoned him and his very young mother. He was raised by a single mom in poverty, bounced around, boyfriends du jour, coming in and out of their lives. You see it? Might have something to do with it. But regardless, my buddy Biff felt so badly about himself that he would always gravitate in relationships, romantic relationships, to women who treated him not very well. Women who sort of kind of mirrored his own self-image, even though objectively you'd think this guy is such an amazing cat, especially given the fact that he's kind of humble, right? What are the odds? I mean, isn't it, in your experience, usually guys that are like really talented and successful and good looking are kind of full of themselves? Right? He was not. He is not. Okay, so he ends up marrying this woman who, I didn't even know how to put this. It's not going to sound really snarky. A lot of us were baffled. Like, why her? She didn't seem to really treat him particularly well. There wasn't anything particularly noteworthy about her. But we're like, okay, fine. She makes you happy. About 2 years into their marriage, she tells him, hey, I want to have an open marriage. And he's like, what? And she's like, well, I told you that, in the past, I've kind of been more bi than purely straight. And would it be okay if, there's this woman that I got to know at the gym, and we've kind of been having an affair. And she's kind of bi also. Do you think she's hot? And he's like, what? And she's like, well, I hope you do, because, I was thinking she could move in with us. And we could just kind of have a threesome perpetually, And he's calling. I'm in grad school, by the way, at this point, in clinical psych. Thank God. Thank God. Because I was able to bite my tongue. He's like, what do you think I should do? And you can imagine my thought bubble, right? Like, what the fuck? No, but I'm like really calm, cool, collected. I'm just like, well, that sounds really hard. Really sorry. How are you doing with that? What's that like for you? And he's like, well, I really love her, and I would do anything it takes. Then I feel like I should just roll with it, and hopefully she'll come to her senses. And he's like, what do you think? And I said, well, I don't think it's really my place to say, but, good luck with all. I didn't say good luck with all that. But, so she moves in. The other woman moves in, and they give it a go. The three of them, and the other woman falls desperately, madly in love with Biff. At which point his wife is like, fuck that, bitch, you're out of here. Okay, now why am I telling you the story? I mean, it's an interesting story, I think. But the point is that our self-image matters above and beyond the objective reality of who we are. If the objective reality, if all you knew about Biff was the objective reality, you'd be like, man, this guy he's got it all together. He is so put together and he's got everything in the world going for him. I'll bet he's going to live happily ever after. And, and it's like, no. That self-image really mattered for him. Now, most of us, the discrepancy between the objective reality and our self-perception is not going to be so wildly, dramatically discrepant. But for some of us, it will be. Regardless, that distance between reality and image matters. How about that? Okay, good deal. Wow, that was pretty cool. Well, let's move on. Oh, how did it? Oh. You know the most amazing thing? You want to know how it ended? That was over 20 years ago. After the other woman got kicked out, Biff's wife was pretty shattered. And I talked to both of them. And I said, given what you've been through, I really think you both would benefit from couples therapy. Now, I was very authentic. I really genuinely thought that if they could put everything out on the table in the context of marital therapy and be honest with each other and learn how to communicate honestly, that probably they would both come to see that this is not going to be a viable long-term relationship. And the sooner we can cut our losses, often the better off we're going to be in the long term. That was what I thought. But I thought regardless, they're both going to need some sort of place where they can, as a couple, okay? They found I helped them find a phenomenal couples therapist, and they worked hard for 2 years together and patched their marriage back together. They're still together. And among all the couples that I know from college who got married, they're, probably in the top half in terms of their level of healthy relationship. It's not one I would have chosen, right? But I give them major props for being honest, learning how to forgive, learning how to rebuild trust. I mean, it's absolutely. Thank you for asking, because I could have just left it there, and you would have used your imagination. I'll bet you would have bet 99-1. There's no way in hell 20 years later this couple's together. Sometimes these stories have a ridiculously surprising happy ending. Yeah, it's very cool. Okay, so let's see what else we got. I think we covered all the advantages for self-report. Disadvantages. Unwillingness to disclose some data. I got to ask you, I want you to be honest. Is there anything about yourself that if you were in a study of personality psychology and you've got some person you've never met who's a researcher asking you about yourself, are there certain things about yourself that you might be unwilling to disclose? Or, to make it even easier for you to answer, imagine this is your friend. What might your friend be unwilling to disclose about themselves? It could be possibly relevant to personality. Anything? Anything? What are people just in general probably not willing to be honest about or to tell psychologists or researchers about themselves? Got anything? Brian, I can't call it. Thank you though, buddy. I appreciate your willingness. Yeah, Allie, what do you got? Intimacy? Yeah, like, maybe sexual behavior. Or... Okay, let me get you on mic if you're going to. Okay, go ahead.
I think I'm a pretty open book, but I know that my responses to a researcher might be more honest because I would never see them again and I don't know them. So I wouldn't feel judged or any bias, whereas my friend knows, everything about me and would actually judge me come on, Allison, you know better than that, I think it would be more open with an uninvolved person. Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point. One of the things we find, and then we'll get Zaykel. Am I saying that right, Zaykel? Okay, we'll get Zaykel. To build on that point, Allie, that's really good. One thing we find is that if we have a computer program assess people,
versus a face-to-face interviewer, a lot of potentially embarrassing personal info that somebody just, they feel a little too awkward sharing face-to-face, they'll tell the computer. There are even therapy bots, like computer programs that have been programmed to do therapy. And, they're really transparently, like, not a real person listening, but they kind of can simulate, like, tell me more about that. Oh, that seems really hard. Can you, say more about what that was like for you? And we find that a lot of people prefer unburdening themselves to the therapy bot than to an actual human being. Or diary, or, yeah, absolutely. Zaycole, what do you got?
People don't like telling other people straightforward when they cheating.
Cheating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's really good, J. Cole. We know that there are lots of cheaters. We're a lot better able to figure out how common it is by asking the people that have been the victims of cheating, that have been on the receiving end of the cheating rather than the cheat, right? Because, yeah, and J. Cole, the thing I love about that comment is it speaks to a broader class of events that we call subject to the social desirability bias. In other words, if you had to think of, like, what is really socially undesirable? What are you going to be judged for? Well, cheating is way up there, right? For some people, it might be certain kinds of sexual activity that you might think, I don't know, I'm a little embarrassed, maybe somebody's going to judge me. Or how about illicit drug use? I mean, there are all the things that are potentially socially undesirable. You guys want to put that in your notes, right? Because that phrase, that social desirability bias, I mean, we have it typically. If you're using self-report, where are we? Unwillingness. People are unwilling to disclose information about themselves that is socially undesirable. Most people. Some people just don't give a shit, and they'll tell you anyway. But most people really do care. Yes. Do you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like we as people, like, as a society, we tend to compare ourselves to other people a lot. So, like, say you're talking to someone and they're asking about you, like, you might not say certain things because you don't want to, because you're comparing yourself to someone else. Like, you'll keep that inside. Like, does that make sense?
Oh, that's really interesting. Did any of you have a parent, or maybe both parents, that would say to you, don't ever brag about yourself. Don't ever say anything. Let other people say the good things about you. Let them. But don't you ever. I mean, my mom, I remember when I was growing up, her phrase was, don't ever toot your own horn. Let somebody else do it. And some of us, I think it's just been so ingrained. It's like, we might find it socially undesirable. I think I moved it, but socially undesirable to say something positive about ourselves. So there's all kinds of ways in which that social desirability thing will shade our self-report. Okay, thank you. Moving on, informant data. Now, informants are the people, make sure you get this, informants are the people that know us well enough to tell the psychologist about what we're like. In other words, we're not going to ask, say if we're doing this for Brian, right? If we're doing this, instead of asking him directly, we might ask, like, his best friend or sibling or, parent or, now, generally speaking, the better the person knows us, the better they're going to be as an informant. The informant is going to have certain advantages and disadvantages compared to our self-report. The biggest advantage, I think, is that they can see often the subject's blind spots. All of us have blind spots of our personality. They're things that are blindingly obvious to everybody else but us. Have you ever seen that with somebody that you know really well, and there's something about them that, people even talk about it a little bit behind their back, and yet they're oblivious, or they're seemingly oblivious, like they just don't even know this really, really obvious thing about themselves? I'll give you a metaphor. It's kind of, I don't know if it's a good one or not, but have you ever known somebody that has bad breath? And you're like, how can they live like that? How can they walk? Well, it turns out that our olfactory system, our sense of smell, habituates very quickly to whatever flora and fauna are growing in our mucosal lining. So in other words, basically, quickly lose the ability to detect anything, any bacteria that might be growing in our mouths and any byproducts they might be giving. In other words, the person with really foul breath has no idea. And they would be just aghast if they had any sense of how offensive their malodorous emanations are from their oral cavity, right? So you would actually be doing them a favor if you gently, maybe pointed out that Tic Tac might be in order, well, or maybe a visit to the dental hygienist. It's like that with our personalities as well. We often have these blind spots. Now, I'll give you an example, and then I want to hear if any of you have one. Okay, so my freshman year of college, I had a young woman I was pretty good friends with. Her name was Susan. That's a real name, by the way, Susan. And we became pretty good friends. You ever had this happen where you're kind of good friends with somebody and you start to get a little bit of a crush on them? And I kind of started to get a little bit of a crush on her. I thought it might have been reciprocal, and there was a formal dance coming up, and I didn't have a date. And I thought, well, I'll float this out there. And she miraculously said yes, which was so far so good. But Susan had this one thing that was a blind spot. She had no idea that she did this, but she was the most verbose, loquacious talker I've ever known. She'd talk, and when she got nervous, she'd talk a lot more. You ever know somebody like that? The more nervous they get, the more they talk. And she had this really, to me and to my buddy Biff, this annoying habit of talking about her hometown. I don't know why. She always was talking about her hometown, which would happen to be this place called Augusta, Georgia. If you're a golf person, you know that the Masters golf tournament takes place at Augusta, Georgia. Well, anyway, she thought Augusta, was really fascinating because she talked about it all the time. And no matter what the topic of conversation was, eventually that was our joke. She had this blind spot. She would bring the conversation back to Augusta, and then we're all just like wanting to, stab ourselves in the face with a fork or something. And all right. So I asked Susan out, and she said yes. And I told my buddy Biff, I said, we got to go to dinner before, we don't have to, but that was a tradition. We're going to go to dinner before the formal. And if she starts doing that thing where she's just like talking all the time, and especially if she starts talking about Augusta, Georgia, I might just have to end the date early or something. And I wouldn't really. I was a nice guy. I am a pretty nice guy. But I would be suffering. I would be suffering needlessly. So I said, Biff, would you be my wingman? And he's like, well, I don't have a date. I'm like, I don't think you're going to have much trouble getting, it would take him like all of 3 minutes, which, so he got a date. And so we double date, and we got to dinner, and I said, all right, if she starts talking about Augusta, we need to have a signal where you can change the subject to something where there's no possibility. We'll just get off on some other topic and change the, and he's like, oh, that's pretty good. Like, well, what do you what should he's like, you want a code word? And I'm like, yeah, a code word. And I said, okay, how about something really random? How about Botswana? And he's like, what? And I was like, well, there's been this, there was a lot happening in Botswana in terms of apartheid. It was a really important time politically in the country of Botswana. And so it's like, well, we can talk about that. We're all interested in that. We all have really strong feelings about what needs to happen there. So he's like, fantastic. All right. So we're at dinner, and she's doing her things. And I'm starting to go, oh no. And I turned to him and I gave him a look, and he's like, hey, Steve, have you heard about, what happened in Botswana last week? And without skipping a beat, as God is my witness, Susan says, hey, did you know the ambassador to Botswana is from Augusta, Georgia? True freaking story. All right, yeah. All right, so we have blind spots. And other people can see them, a good informant, and that's really, really useful, because if we just rely on self-report, we're not going to get that information. What else? Number 2, this isn't that interesting, really, but it's kind of important. Is there somebody who knows you so well that they can usually tell what you're thinking and feeling, even if you're not saying anything about it, right? Have you ever had somebody that knows you so well that they can tell if you're feeling something before you are consciously aware of it? That's pretty cool when that happens. right? For some of us, if we don't express anger easily, sometimes we have a little tell, and somebody who knows us really well can tell that we're angry before we are even consciously aware of it. We can tell we're upset before we're consciously aware of it. So informants can be really good for that sort of thing if they know us really well. Then finally, for an advantage, I love this one. Even when other people's perceptions are distorted, because make no mistake, informants have their own biases. In fact, it has been suggested that in some respects, our friends are the people that agree to share our self-serving biases. In other words, very often our friends also think better of us than they should. And vice versa, we think better of them than the objective data would warrant. In fact, there's an old adage, something like, I'll give you the paraphrase. Basically, if you love someone, if you care about someone, you will, for the most part, through the lens of your affection, always assume the best about them, always give them the charitable interpretation of what they're doing. You know what I mean? Have you ever seen the situation where somebody says something, and depending on how you take it, it could be really awful, or it could be like, oh, okay, I kind of, that's not a big deal at all. Sometimes when people are arguing, somebody will say something that could possibly be offensive, but they didn't mean it that way at all, and the person will choose to take it as the worst possible thing that the worst possible person could have said. And then somebody else, through what we often call this is the principle of charity. And the Greek word for charity means affection or love. Through the principle of charity, it's like you want to assume the best possible spin on what they've said. Not to put words in their mouth, but like give them the benefit of the doubt. Like what's the best possible way they could have meant that? And that's what we do with our friends and our loved ones. So we have a very strong bias toward the people that we care about. That we're going to always interpret things usually in the best possible way. Now, that does not give us the most objective picture of who they are. It's going to lead us to have biases where if we have affection for them, we're going to see them generally as better than they are. If we don't like them, we're going to often see them as worse than they are. And if you have anybody that's an enemy, you're going to see them as worse than they are. If you have a group of individuals that you regard as your out-group, and I'm going to say a whole lot more about that before too long, but all of us seem to be kind of hardwired to divide the world between those who are part of our group, however we define that, and we often have several in-groups, and then out-group. And if there's somebody that's part of an out-group, you will often give them the opposite of the benefit of the doubt. You'll often take the worst possible interpretation of what they're doing. Now, here's where it gets kind of cool, I think. Even when it's distorted, other people's perceptions of us is important. In other words, our social reputation matters. The way other people see us matters, even if it's distorted. Now, here's where I need an example from you. Did you ever know somebody in high school or beyond that had a reputation for being worse than they actually are in some key respect? You know them. You know that they're not an asshole. You know that they're not arrogant or whatever, not a bad person. But that reputation, and because of their reputation, it really affected their life. Somebody got an example of that I can hear about? Like somebody you knew, and you knew the reputation was unjust and unfair. Maddie, what do you got?
So one of my best friends from high school, he would kind of come on too strong on the girls, and then all of a sudden it became like this big thing around school that he was like this total massive creep and just like an awful person. But I had known him since like 4th grade, and so we had been hanging out, and still to this day, like my friends will be like, why would you hang out with him? Like he's a total creep. But he's not. He's really smart. He's really cool, really funny. He just wants love.
And how did the negative reputation actually affect him or impact him? Did it actually have real world consequences?
Yeah. I mean, he definitely sees himself as someone who maybe isn't as worthy of things, and like he really kind of takes it to heart, like if he's rejected, because he thinks that it's like reinforcing this really weird like stigma kind of around him in the hometown. And so like he really wants to get out of our hometown just because he feels like he's never going to be able to find people who like him because of this weird thing that just happened in high school.
That's a wonderful example. And in fact, have you guys ever known they had the thing, they just want the clean start, they want the like a fresh, because once that reputation gets in place, it's really hard to dislodge it. And sometimes people who've been on the receiving end of an unfair reputation, or maybe it's even a fair reputation, maybe they really have, been problematic. A lot of times they just really fantasize about, like, I need to get that clean start because of the power of reputational effects. Okay, have you ever known somebody that was super socially anxious and shy, really anxious, and yet their reputation is not for that? Their reputation, by the way, how are people often perceived that are super anxious and shy? How do other people often perceive them? It's not that. It's something else. Stuck up. Yes, stuck up. Why? Because it's like, I tried to talk to that at a party and they just they just kind of blew me off. And maybe they think they're too good for me. They're just like always reserved and like, has anybody ever known somebody like that? Anybody got an example? Is someone you can tell us about?
I have one back here.
Oh, you got one back there? Okay, yeah, go ahead, and then I got one up here.
Well, like my cousin, she was on the basketball team, but she was seen as like the kind that just really didn't want to communicate with her teammates, or they just seen her that they thought she was better than everybody.
Because she was withdrawn and reserved. And
she's just shy. She's grown
yeah.
up even
Yeah.
around her family, at family functions, growing up.
That's a great example.
In elementary school.
You got 15.
Now that she's in hie school, they see it as she's being stuck up.
Yeah, that's a great. Thank you.
You don't know her like.
That's a great example, because you got 15 people on a basketball team. You'd think that they'd get to know each other really quickly, but I've seen it as well. I've seen it on NBA teams, even where there's somebody that's really reserved and they're just really taken the wrong way. Athena, what do you got, real quick?
I just had a friend that was just so socially anxious that they just freeze and they just literally couldn't talk to other people. And so everyone else just seemed offended by that. Like, well, why wouldn't you want to talk to me? But it was just purely just so much anxiety.
Yeah. And it's often really devastating to their social reputation. Okay, disadvantage for informant data. We talked about biases. Anybody have a mom or dad that, yes, you have, I'm so glad. Anybody have a mom or a dad or some other person who just really thinks the world of you, that like even if you did something horrible, like they'd be on the stand before the judge being like, there's no way my little sweet Schmoopy could have possibly... You know that horrible, I'm sorry I'm moralizing, but you know that horrible monster, Timothy McVeigh, who blew up, I think he killed like 160 people in Oklahoma City, And I mean, the dude was like as guilty as the day is long from my read of the evidence. I mean, it was just slam dunk, overwhelming. The FBI had this dude, he's guilty. I mean, as I read the evidence anyway, and as the jury read the evidence, as the judge read the evidence, his sentencing hearing. So he's already guilty, right? The FBI has proved their case beyond any shadow of any doubt for any of the jurors. And they're having the sentencing hearing. And the defense, basically the defense is trying to have him spared the death penalty. That's what he's facing. Death is capital crime, federal crime, capital offense. And they bring McVeigh's mom on the stand. And McVeigh's mom is there, my sweet Timmy. She's telling stories about like how sweet he was and the puppies that he loved, and that, it's like, there's no way my boy could do this monstrous thing. There's no way. Right? And the rest of us are just like, oh, this is sad. Right? Because she's heartbroken. Why? Because of bias. There's no way she can reconcile her view of her son and this horrible atrocity that he's perpetrated, all these lives that he's out. You see it? We have incredible biases for the people that we're going to be informing on, and that is something that we as psychologists are going to have to take into consideration if we get an accurate picture. Okay, the other one is kind of interesting, just really quickly, limited information. How do informants have limited information? Okay, here's the best example, I think, that I can give. Have you ever gone back to your high school crowd, back to your hometown, back to, and hopefully since you graduated, you've changed a bit, you've grown, but they still, all they saw, the only information they have about your personality is what they saw in that one domain in high school, and now you're this like somewhat different person. And there's all this information they do not have, and they still see you as that person you used to be. Or maybe you go hang out with your siblings, and all they do is see you at home in that limited environment, but they don't see you out socially with your friends, with your peers. Have you ever seen this, where like somebody is perceived as one person in their family, but like that is a really, really off sort of caricature of who they actually are when they're out away from their family of origin? Somebody got an example really quick of that, a really good one? Really good one, somebody I haven't heard from? Yeah, Jack, go ahead.
So my cousin looks and acts for the most part like a huge frat boy. Like he will go to parties, is fantastic at beer pong, that whole sort of thing. But in reality, he's the biggest nerd I have ever met and loves Pokemon more than anyone else I've ever in the world. He's just a huge nerd, but like only to me.
Oh, only to you. Yeah, so a lot of other people have very limited information, and if we use them as informants, we'd get a very distorted view of who. Yeah, okay, thanks very much. All right, I got to move on in the interest of time. We have 4 sources of data. We've covered 2 so far. Let's talk now about a third source, behavioral observation. This one is the most complicated because it comes in 3 varieties. So behavioral observation is basically, look, we're not going to ask you what you're like. We're not going to ask your friends and family or people who know you what you're like. We're not going to use informant data. We're just going to observe you. And we're going to make really informed inferences or guesses about what you're like based on what we see in your behavior, based on what we observe. There are 3 types. I want to make sure you know them. First, naturalistic, exactly like it sounds. This is, think of like, if you're studying primate behavior, if you're like, Jane Goodall studying chimps in the Gombe, naturalistic observation is you are observing the subject in their natural setting, ideally in a hidden sort of way, so that the subject does not know they're being observed. Why? Because typically when we know we're being watched, we change. Does that make sense? If you know there's a hidden camera, if you know the camera's there, you're going to change what you show, compared to if you're being observed completely surreptitiously, secretively. Now, why don't we do more naturalistic observation in the field? Because you can get a lot of really good information. It's usually regarded as unethical to observe people without their knowledge and consent. Does that make sense? Would you be pissed off if you found out somebody had been secretly taping you without your knowledge and consent? I would. Even if I wasn't doing anything particularly, embarrassing, it seems like a real intrusion and violation. So we regard it as unethical under most circumstances. Here's the question. When can we ethically, naturalistically observe someone to make inferences about their personality? Under what circumstances or conditions could you ethically use naturalistic observation? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, exactly right. The way the legal system is written, the way consent laws are written, minors, which is to say anybody under 18, it does not have to give their consent for any kind of procedure like that, for any research, as long as the parents give their consent. So if the parents say, yeah, you can use naturalistic observation to videotape my child at the playground, at their school, at their preschool, at their, whatever, their daycare, then knock yourself out. You can go for it. You have permission. You can do it. So a lot of child researchers, a lot of developmental researchers use naturalistic observation a lot because they can. And because they can do it in a way that's completely secretive, unobserved. What else? There are other situations you can do that. Yeah, let me see. Hold it up really big and proud. I'll see if I can get close enough to read it with my failing. I said, Ellie Rose, go ahead. Yeah, that's interesting. If somebody is deemed to be a danger to others or themselves, then all bets are off in terms of clinical confidentiality for sure. So as a psychologist, if I'm doing therapy with somebody, everything that's said is completely secret. But if they tell me, hey, I'm thinking about going out and shooting up blah, 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 then it's like, but that doesn't exactly translate to the realm of naturalistic observation. It's an interesting guess, but it's not exactly right. Vivek, what do you got?
I was going to say people in prison.
Yeah. Somebody is in a situation where they have limited rights, or to sort of build on that, what if we're in a public setting? What if we're in a public setting? It is legal and is regarded typically as ethical to observe somebody and possibly even to videotape them in a public setting. And so all of us, you ever just go hang out, walking on Mass Street? You're on all kinds of hidden video feeds. Every time you go to the bank, every time you use an ATM machine, you are being videotaped. And we could conceivably get consent to do naturalistic observation based on that. Somebody else have a hand up over here? I think we got it. Okay, this is one of my favorite. I mean, it's actually super dark. It's twisted. Do you like going to those dark and twisted places? I usually don't, but it's like I can't not look. So here we go. Evaluation of covert video surveillance and the diagnosis of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Lessons from 41 cases. Okay, so first things first. What the hell's Munchausen syndrome? What the hell's Munchausen syndrome? Yeah, let me see your name tag so I can call you Allison, yeah.
So Munchausen syndrome by proxy is when parents purposely either make their children sick or make it look like their children are sick for the reaction that it gets.
Yeah, typically they find it really rewarding and reinforcing to be in a medical setting. They like the attention. They like the whole vibe of being in the hospital or being at the doctor's office. Munchausen syndrome is they're making themselves sick, injecting themselves with poisons or, whatever, swallowing things. And doctors have to know about this because it's real and you see it. There's a subset of parents that do this with their kids. They inject their kids with poison. They make their kids sick. And it's horrible. And you want to lock these people up, right? And thankfully we do get to lock them up when we catch them. But they're really hard to catch. So this hospital, Scottish Rite Hospital in Atlanta, actually got permission to, because it's a private hospital, they got permission to install videotape, video recording devices in the hospital rooms of kids where the attending pediatrician suspected Munchausen syndrome by proxy. And in 23 of 41 patients, they actually caught the parents harming their child right there in the hospital, injecting them with stuff. In some cases, putting a pillow over their head till the kid passed out, and then calling the nurses in to say, oh, my child's unconscious. I mean, yeah. Pretty dark, twisted, horrible stuff, but a phenomenal application of naturalistic observation that we regard not only as ethical, but as, I think, heroic. All right, so that's naturalistic observation. Experiment, and then I'm going to tell you about this is, by the way, the card from the Rorschach. Stay tuned. We'll get there. Experiment is when we are, just like it sounds, we're going to put a person in a situation that's usually kind of extreme, kind of unusual, in order to see a reaction that we think is particularly telling about their personality, particularly illuminative or informative, either because it's a really rare situation that we normally wouldn't be able to see through naturalistic observation, or, we can't use naturalistic observation. We can usually get, this is kind of cool, we can usually get consent. We can get approval through human subjects institutional review boards. In other words, the panels that are set up to protect the people participating in research. We can usually get their permission to use deception, to lie to people about what's really happening. To lie to people about what's really happening if we can give a good scientific justification for lying to them temporarily. And then, of course, at the end of the experiment, we say, oh, you know what? Like most of you've all had intro or AP Psych. Do you remember Milgram's classic obedience to authority experiment where people thought they were administering really, really dangerous, potentially lethal shocks to a learner, a research participant who actually was a paid actor, who's like screaming bloody murder in the other room, and they're talking about their heart condition, and it's like, If you just ask somebody on the street, like, hey, would you be willing to administer a potentially lethal shock to a complete stranger just on the say-so of some dude in a white lab coat and a clipboard saying the experiment requires that you continue? You know, probably 99% of the population would be, no fucking way I'm going to administer a lethal shock to somebody just on the say-so of the experimenter. And, I mean, the reason we're still talking about Milgram and his experiment over 50 years later is because the psychologists that he surveyed and asked, hey, what percent of the population is going to be willing to do this? They said, maybe 1%. Probably 1% of the population are psychopaths. That is true, by the way. About 1%. We'll talk about what that means later. They said about 1%, and Milgram gets 65%. Now, we'll unpack that a little bit next time. But suffice it to say that most of the time you can't actually see how compliant a person's going to be in a situation. You can put them in that experiment. One that I like a little bit better that I was going to show you today, but I'll send you the video link, okay? You know the marshmallow experiment? You know the marshmallow experiment? If you don't know it, you're gonna love it either way. It's only like a 4-minute video clip. These kids are freaking adorable. They're 4-year-olds that are having to struggle with waiting 15 minutes to eat their marshmallow so they can get a second one. By the way, it's hilarious how they'll kind of be like, you know, licking it. It's like, oh, this doesn't count. And they're licking and they're like tearing off little pieces. It's like, no, they'll totally never notice that I've torn off about 18 little pieces. And anyway, you got to watch it. Finally, personality tests. Make sure you get this. This is something that you will lose points on the exam if you do not get this. Most personality tests are self-report. Most personality tests are self-report. There's a small subset of personality tests, though, that are regarded as behavioral observation. Specifically, the tests where you do not know what you're reporting about yourself, where they're mysterious. It's like the ink blot test. And by the way, if you don't know how to spell that, we'll be studying it a little bit later on this semester, but I'll give it to you now. You can get it in your notes if you want. The Rorschach. Can you see that? R-R-S-C-H-A-C-H. We show people a series of 10 cards like this that are ink blots, and we hand it to them, and we just say, what might this be? And you don't know what you're giving away about your personality. If you say, by the way, what might that be? What do you see? What do you see, Jack? What do you see? Two bears giving each other a high five. Is this their little hands right there? Their little hands are kind of facing each other. Anybody see a jack-o'-lantern kind of thing here? Anybody see a fox with the little floppy ears and the snout right there? Anybody see a bat? You with me? Yeah, moth. I mean, there are lots of possibilities. I gave this card. Wait, I need your attention real quick. I gave this card to a guy. Oh, it's time. Damn it. I was going to tell you. Remind me to tell you about the cancer patient that I gave this card to one time. And the cancer patient's answer. Hey, you guys have a great weekend. I'll be here for anybody who wants to chat. We'll pick this up next time.
By the way, if you have not had your official Psych 320 class photo, Corey is doing photo ops right up here. 1 point extra credit for getting your photo taken with your name tag.